before the internet? Can it be a personal website?
We'll talk about that in a second. Okay, we're back. And we just started talking about our final project. It's COMP1002, Web and Internet Fundamentals, week 10, lesson 10, part 2 for broadcast. And sorry, Keith, you were asking if you knew somebody who existed back in the day.
Before the internet.
Before the internet, and
become a portfolio site.
The person, as a person, you want to talk about the person as a product? Again, I want to hear your concept fully blown like next week. So maybe what you guys come up with is a little bit of a concept piece next week that I can hear about what you're working on. Who are you working with? If you're going to choose to work with somebody else, right? As an example, if there's somebody you want to work with, again, maximum is 1 or 2 people. So no 3 people, 4 people. I don't want a whole group of people working on this little project, which is really not that big, right? So, let's talk about it next week. So I'm gonna bug you about it, like I said. So the first thing we're gonna do is do a quiz in the first hour or so, which is gonna be a quiz on the stuff we've talked about, the box model, CSS, more about CSS lists, text, all that kind of stuff that we've been talking about so far. We'll do a little bit of a quiz, and then we'll get right into, I hope by then, more JavaScript, and I want to see your concepts by next week. All right, so I've got this little project I set up, which is, it's kind of empty, but we're going to start working with this one today. If you go to GitHub, and if you go to your Georgian site, right, Georgian College, COMP1002 lesson 10, there's just a couple of files to download here, so we can get going. So I want you guys, instead of me typing everything out from scratch with you guys, you just can go up there and grab these files so we can start off. So again, Georgian College, COMP1002 lesson 10. And I've got things up in Visual Studio Code here. And when I run this thing, I'm just going to run the little web server, right? So you can see what it looks like. On 8080, all it looks like is this, right? So again, there's no styling to it at all because I've taken the styles away, right? So let's review a little bit of the box model for next week, because next week I'm going to test you on this stuff, right? So when I talk about the box model, and remember I talk about the let's say 4 or 5 components of the box model. What are the when I talk about the components of the box model, what is one of the components of the box model? Anybody? Let's think about the box model itself. Well, I'm not showing. Yes.
Padding.
Padding would be a component. Okay, but let's go for what's the first one? If I was going to work from inside out, can you tell me all the components are inside out of the box model, right? So what's the innermost component of the box model? Since you're talking.
Trying to remember. I don't want to look it up.
Don't look it up. Don't look it up. Just tell me what it is. How about someone in the back over there? The inner component. If you look at the box model, what's the innermost component of the box model? If you look inside the box, what's the innermost one? Don't look it up. Just answer the question if you can. Right? Yes. Content. Then it's padding. Right? And then after padding, it's what? Border. Right? Border. And after border, it's margin. So it goes content, padding, border, margin. Right? Content, padding, border, margin, from inside out, right? Question for you guys: if it's content, padding, border, margin, I have my content. This is my content for my box model. I don't have any padding, right? I need to add some padding here, and let's take a look at my HTML. I have a div tag, right? That I have my H1 and my P elements here, my paragraph elements, and I want to add margin, right, around my container class. How do I do that? Again, this is just review for people who remember, right? So I'm going to go into my main.css. Please tell me, I'm going to target my container class. How do I write this in? And again, this is just review for next week because you're going to be tested on it. How do I write a container class? Some code for my container class. Anybody? Come on, guys. I need some help over here. Yes. Dot. Right. So I'm going to say dot for my class, I write container, the name of the class that I'm targeting, because that's the class that I've got here in my, I'm going to do a split screen here so you can see my HTML. So here's my HTML, right? My class is called container. I'm targeting my container. And inside my container, I'm going to write my declarations. So the first piece is my selector. This is my selector up here. That's what it's called. Inside this code block, which is annotated by these curly braces, right? Inside there, I have my declarations. Each line that I put in there is an executable command, something that I want from my CSS to how I want to format my class, okay? Or the whatever is contained inside the container that the class is associated with. Okay, so I want to add margin from my container. So I want to add, like, I don't know, 10% margin from my container. How do I do it? And I want to add it all the way around. What's the declaration that I got to put in for margin? Guys, this is pretty simple. Margin. I want to make it 10%. 10%, right? Okay, that's my container's margin. What about padding? If I want to add padding to my container, and I want to add a bit of padding, how do I type it? Padding. It's very simple. I know this is kind of not rocket science, guys, but I'm asking the questions and only one person is answering, which is always very concerning. You guys should be screaming it out, saying padding, margin, right? It's very simple, right? There's no trick questions here, really. Okay, so I want to add a padding of 10% for a second and see how that works. So if I had margin and padding of 10%, and I refresh my site, that's going to be pretty big, by the way, it'll look like this. It's massive, right? How come? Because even though the margin in padding is 10%, it's 10% of my width, right? And that's why it pushes it right into the middle of my screen, right? And it's all the way around. How do I test my layout? What's a good way to test my layout? Yes? Put on a border, right? Now you can either define a border class, a temporary border class that you can use. So if I go back to my code here, I can create a, let's say, some kind of border class, like a test border. Let's just call it that, test border. And I haven't attached my test border anywhere, but I want to make it a border, and it's going to be all the way around. And remember, when I do a border, I need the size of the border. So, example, like 1 pixel, the color of the border, or the style of the border, which would be dashed or dotted or solid, right? So solid, and the color of the border, which would be, let's say, red, right? So if I do that, I got to apply the test border class into the element that I want to affect, right? So here's my element, my div element, and I want to apply the red test border class. So I add it on to the container. So I say container space, and then I can add my test border in there. Right? So once I do that, if I go back to my page and I refresh, I can see the border that I've got going on here. And now I said 10%, so there's 10% here, 10% here, 10% here, and 10% there, right? And if 10% is huge, because 10% means if I split my page into 10 columns, right, 10 columns, I have one whole column, 10% within each one. So here's one column, here's a second column, that's 2, 3, 4 columns, and that means I have 6 more columns left for the middle, right? That's equivalent what it is. And because I split up the top, everything around 10%, it's gonna be the same. So there's 10% up here, 10% here, another 10% there, another 10% there, another 10% there. It looks massive, and it's centered in the middle because of my layout. So obviously 10% is too much, right? And we use the border to help us. We're using the border to help us troubleshoot our layout, because our layout right now is pretty ugly, right? And normally what we would have is some regular styles, but I've normalized my layout with a reset.css. Notice that I've included this in your files. So if you actually went to download the files that I put up for you on GitHub, the test files we're using have been normalized or reset first, and then we're applying our styles, which means none of the regular styles that are part of the browser styles, the default browser styles, are available to us at this point. We've just normalized them all. They're gone, right? Okay, so that's pretty big. I know I want to reduce this, and I want to use percentages, because if I go to 1%, as an example, if I go back to this and refresh, that's more reasonable, right? It's a more reasonable number, 1% as opposed to 10%. 10% is massive, right? And 1% means that if I was to take my layout and smash it up like this, it's going to retain the 1%. So notice how here it looks a lot smaller than here. Here's more border, more margin on this side, and more margin here than when I smash it in like this. When I smash it in like this, it's lots less. Why? Because it's still taking 1% of the total space of the width of my screen, right? So percentages are good, but we got to think about it. What happens when we kind of move in? If I want a consistent look and feel to something, I can put in some other things in here to make it so that there's a minimum. And to understand what that is, right? I like to do inspect element here in the browser. So I look at inspect element, right click on it, and this is Chrome, right? Notice how when I hover over, it gives me the colors. Orange being, the actual margin. The green is your padding, right? And the red, which is very small right now, is the border, and the blue is your content. Right? So if I click onto there, you can see the box model on the bottom. If you're ever concerned about what the box model looks like, it's always in the bottom of your Chrome, right? So it tells you here's the content, the padding, border, and the margin, right? Notice how the border is 1 pixel is what I've decided on. And in this layout, the margin is 12 pixels, and so is the 12, almost 13 pixels, and so is the padding, right? So what if I said, I want 1%, I want my margin to be 1%, as an example, my margin, but I want the minimum number. Is there a way of adding, of selecting a minimum number for that margin? Like, so it's 1%, but I don't want it to go lower than 1%. Like so 1% means like 12 pixels, right? How can I do that? Is there something else that I could put in? And of course, to test it out, and there may not be, right? So let's test this out and see what we look at. What other things we have with margin? If I say margin here and I look at code hinting, I have the ability to do things like decide which margin, my bottom, my left, my right, or my top. Sometimes a margin of 1% is good because it gives me a the right layout. But I want to be in a smaller layout. I want to be able to target it a little bit differently because it's a smaller layout. It's for a mobile device or a tablet, right? Now we're going to talk about today. I want to talk about responsive design techniques. So when you look at a tablet or mobile device, you can use a different layout specifically for those devices. And we'll talk about how to do that today. So let's leave it for now, 1%. When we get to it today, there's a bit of code we have to wrap around this stuff to show that. One of the other techniques that responsive design uses, and we'll talk about this in a second, is it uses the ability for us to have a grid of, kind of a grid that we create on our page. So think about a grid layout, right, with rows and columns, right? And the columns are the most important. They usually, most modern responsive design layouts, like Bootstrap, uses a 12-column grid, right? 12-column grid. So if I was going to take 100% of my layout, and let's bring up the calculator here for a second to show you what I'm talking about. So I go to, let's just do this together. If I take my calculator and I say, take 100, and I want to divide it 100%, divide it by 12, right? It's a funny number. You're going to get a number like 8.3333, kind of repeating forever, right? So that means that every column in your 12-column grid is going to be 8%, right, approximately. Okay? So that means if I use one column for my layout, if I only assign one column, I'm going to assign 8%. Now you saw how big 10% was. It was pretty big, right, one column. And typically, I don't use less than about 2 columns when I do stuff. So if I was going to set up my 12-column grid myself without using Bootstrap or Foundation or something, I want to make my 12-column grid, each column approximately 8.33%, right? Approximately. So let's do that. Let's put together, our grids for our column. So I'm going to talk about like this. I'm going to say, I want to go, start with column. So I'll say column 1, right? So one column basically is what I'm saying. right? And I want to make it so that the width of the column, each of the you know, if I combine this thing, if I assign something one column of width as an example, it is 8.33%. So I'm going to say width, right, is 8.33%. Okay? Approximately. That's for one column. And for two columns then, so I'll go to column 2. If I was going to start building this out, and we'll do a few of them here. I don't know if we'll be able to do every single one. There's 12 columns we have to kind of cover. So we'll multiply this by 2. So we'll get about 16.66%. And again, you might go 16.67, but 16.66 is okay, right? And let's go column 3. We're laying this out. And so about 24%, 24.99 if I'm not wrong. Almost 25, but not quite. And so there's 3 columns, about 25%, right? So if I keep going, column 4, so 4 column layout, I have a width of, again, so again, it's 8.33 multiplied by 4, which is roughly 33.33%. And bear with me while I do this with you so you see my strategy around this. So width for my 5 column layout, again, 8.33 times 5, 41.66. We'll keep doing it. Column 6, so 6 columns wide. Now 6 columns should be about half, right? Because that's kind of the middle, right? So it should be around, if I was to calculate this correctly, a 6 column layout out of 12 columns should be 50%, right? And let's just try and do that. And so if I go 8.33 times 6, I should have about 50, which is 49.9998, something like that. I would make this 52. We're gonna equalize these things in a second, right? 50% of our layout. Let's keep going, and then I'm going to update this to GitHub for those people who can't follow along or don't understand what I'm talking about here. So again, I'm going to add in my 7 columns, 7 times 8.33, roughly 58.33. Makes sense, because 50 plus 8.33. And then column 8 with the width. Notice I have a lot of little classes here. And by the way, I'm making a mistake because I'm not putting the dot in there because that's what I want. I want each of these to be a class. I forgot to do that in my zeal to get this all done for you guys. Okay, let's try this out. So 58.33 okay, 8.33 times 8, 66.66. Oh, that's a bad number. And let's go into the next one, which is 9. We're almost done. I know it's tedious, but please bear with me while we do this. You'll see there's advantages to doing this kind of stuff. And here's my width. We're almost like remaking one of those responsive frameworks slowly today. So 9 times 8.33, 74.99. So that's almost like 75%. And I would actually put it as 75%. And I might as well make this one, because 3 out of 12, right, really is 25%, right? So that should be exactly 25, right? The rest should be kind of close to that. 9. Ten should be that should be easy, right? Width is 83.33%. Easy to figure out. And column 11, so 11 columns, which is kind of weird. 8.33 times 11, 91.66 approximately, I would say. 1.66%. And of course, column 12 is 100%. Okay, so why do I make all these classes? So let's say I want my my container again to be, it's going to be surrounding everything, and my test border for my container is what I'm using. I'm using a margin of 1%, and my padding of 1%. If I think that's too low, I can always increase that a little bit. So let's make it 2% for now. So if I was to refresh my page, I haven't applied my styles yet. If I press my page, this is a little bit better of where I want my my container to be. See how it's pasted down? But let's say I want my nav bar to be 100% of my layout, right? So instead of making it 100% and specifying that in the nav bar property, I can apply a border, or so I can apply a column layout, right? Okay, so let's try this out. So if I go back to my code here, and I want to make a nav bar, and it's going to be above my div tag which is with a container class, right? Let's make my nav bar here at the top, and we'll put it inside of a header. We'll put a nav. Remember how we did this last time? And I want to make it an unordered list, and inside the unordered list, I want to have 5 list items like we normally do. Li times 5. You guys have seen this lots of times now. Inside the list items, I want to have an anchor tag. That's the link, right? And inside my link text, I want to have something that says link and then number, and then it's going to be $. $. Represents a variable of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And if I press tab, and I get this unordered list that gives me a bit of navigation, right? So let's say, for example, my header, I want it to be 100%, right? So instead of assigning it to my header, I can actually add a class of call 12, right? So I say class is equal to call dash 12 columns. Right? So that's my header. And let's put a test border around that too, because we want to see it. So I say test border. Right, there it is. And if I was to go back to my site here to see what it looks like, right, and refresh, it looks like this. You can see how the width of my design is now kind of 12, the whole 100%. I don't have a margin on my header at all, just 100%. Now I want to redo my nav, and this is what we kind of did last week. We did a nav from scratch, right? So remember that I want these things to be next to each other. So what's the declaration to make the list items in my nav element or my UL element to be side by side? Anybody remember? Inline. I love it that you remember. Good. I know you think I'm being facetious, but I'm really not. Like, some people don't remember these things. So again, this is my just to lay it out. I want to put some comments in here. So these are my layout styles for columns, column widths. That's how many columns I want to take up. We're going to use these in a bit. And what I want to target is my UL in this particular thing is it's a nav, but I want to create a class here for my nav, which I'm going to call main nav, or just call it nav, my nav class, right? So if I define a nav class, then I'm going to say down here, here's my, again, I'll call it navigation styles. My navigation styles, I'm going to kind of create a kind of a target. So nav, anything that has nav on it, right, as an example, with a list item that's in the nav class, they're all going to be my display property is going to be set to inline. Okay, so for my list items, and let me just update GitHub because I've added a bunch of stuff here, and let's just kind of save that as well. So I'm going to go to GitHub here. I'm going to say I updated my CSS and my index.html. I added some columns, so I added column classes to CSS. And I will update and push that up to GitHub for you guys. So if you can follow along and you can do what I was doing with that percentage and whatever, you can certainly go up and grab it. Okay, so going back to that though, if I look at the my LI with a display inline, what does that look like now? If I refresh, it looks like this, right? So notice how my list items are side by side, right? But they still have a couple of annoying things. One is they're blue, right? Or they look like links, right? And they also have some kind of underline, right? Because they're links, right? So the underline is a default thing for links. Even if I reset my styles on my page, I still got links with underlines, right? So I don't get rid of that. So if I go back to my code, I want to get rid of them. And where are those underlines? Are they on the list items? Are they on the anchor tags? What are the underlines? What are the underlines for? Right? The underlines tell us it's a link. If the underlines tell us it's a link, which element is it part of? Is it the anchor element, the A tag, or is it the list item? Yes, anchor element. And the reason why is because I know it sounds silly. You're answering and you're like, hey, it's an anchor. Yes, the man gets $50 today for being awake, right? But the reason why I'm asking this thing is because people confuse it. They go, I want to take the underline away. I don't know which element to target. I'm targeting the list item, but it's not working. It's not your list item. It's your anchor tag. So that means I got to do something like this. I'm going to say nav anchor tag. Right? So any anchor tag that's inside of a container that has a nav class is how we read it, right? Takes away the decoration, the underline that's on our links as we build up our links, right? So if I go back to this and refresh, now you see that the links are gone, right? Okay, cool. Each of these list items, I want them to be side by each, but I want them to have a little bit of padding inside, right? I want some padding inside the list items. So let's go back here. And if I add padding to the list items, it's going to go here, right? Because this is where I'm targeting this. So displays inline is 1, but I want them to have padding, and I want them to have a little bit of padding inside. I got to be careful how much padding I put in because remember we're starting to deal with percentages, and I want to take away as many of the pixels as I can, not using pixels. So it's a little bit of a challenge to try and figure this out. I can't give too much, and I can't give too little, but there's got to be a little bit of padding in there. So if I say padding all the way around for my list items of 0.5%, see what that does for us, right? I'm using percentages because I want to be flexible, right? There it is. So what does this do? So if I actually take my screen and kind of lower it, then you see how they kind of crunch together a little bit more as I lose screen width, right? So it's not going to be a fixed padding. They still got enough separation for me, right? So they're not like nested next to each other, right? But they're not as, it's not going to be a fixed number. It's going to be a percentage. Again, I want to have this flexible, fluid layout, if you will, right? As opposed to having a fixed layout with actual pixels, because regardless of my layout, whether it's a small screen or large screen, right, I'm going to have pixels. It's going to be limit me in terms of how big it's going to be. All right. So here, what I want to do with this one is I want to push all of these. I want to push all of these to the right. If I want to push all my list items to the right, which element am I targeting? Let's go back to this. Here's my nav bar that I'm kind of creating, right? And I want to push all these list elements to the right. What am I targeting with my, no, yes? The UL, the unordered list, the whole list container itself, this piece right here. I'm making it so that everything inside the UL, elements heads of the UL, I want them to be pushed to the right. Now there's one way to do that, which is of course to target the UL, which would be above here. I usually try and make it in order. So starting off from the UL, then hitting the LI, then finally the A tag, right? The anchor tag. I want to kind of go in here and say nav UL. And the reason why I'm saying nav there first is because maybe other unordered lists that I might have on my page. I don't want all my list items. That's part of my navigation, right? That I have a nav tag associated with. Okay, cool. So here's my nav UL, and I want to basically say that it's text align right, right? I want to align my text, all my text to the right. Let's see what that does for me. If I go back and refresh, then I get them way over here, on the right side of my page. Okay, cool. So I've got my text align right. My nav bar is pretty darn small, right? So I want to make this a little bit bigger, higher. You know, it's kind of too crunched up. And I've added, you know, kind of a percentage around everything for my padding, but my percentage didn't do anything for my height. Notice how it didn't do that, right? Well, there's a couple reasons for that. And one of them, I'll bring back the box model in a second, but one of them is that I've specified here in my meta tags, width is equal to device width, initial scale 1. I could put something like this. It's not going to complain, but I could put something like height is equal to device height. Be careful when you do this, by the way. But you need to do this sometimes in order for you to know what the current device height is. Right? You don't know what the device height is. This is for the viewport itself, not for the whole web page, just the viewport. So when I say viewport, I mean when you look at your phone, just what's visible here. There might be other stuff over here around the phone, like outside of the viewable area of the phone. But my viewport is only the part of the phone that I can see. Right? So what's the height of my viewport? Well, for most modern phones, it's at least 480, at least, right? 480 pixels. So if I say 1% of 480, right? You know, again, 10% would be 48 pixels. 1% would be about 4 pixels at the minimum. Right now I have 0. And I've specified a padding of 0.5%. This padding, because I haven't specified padding top, padding left, padding right, padding bottom, or any of that kind of stuff, right? It's 0.5% all around. That's what it means. This is the shorthand to say padding is the same all around, right? Okay, let's go back and see what that does now. If I just change this, just adding in this height equals the device height, and see if it does anything. And I don't expect it will. Let's see. Nothing, right? Because the thing is, device height, even though we've specified this. First of all, this isn't a device. This is a, you know, I'm reporting here based on the size of my browser. Okay. So I need something else in there, not just you know, padding of 0.5. And this is okay. For height, we can always scroll, right? So it's not a bad thing, which means that my padding right and left is really what I want to have a percentage on, not my padding top and bottom. So how do I do that? Well, the shorthand, if I want to do longhand for the box model, I go in a clockwise direction. So I start off with the top, right, bottom, and left for my box model, right? That's how it goes. So if I look at padding, then the top would be the first number. I don't care about padding for the top, so I'm going to put it as 0, right? The next one is to the right, I want it 0.5%, right? To the bottom, I want it 0, right? Padding of 0. And to the left, I want it 0.5%. So this is another way to write it. Okay? And this would be the same effect. If I was to save this thing like this, again, this is shorthand for specifying which side of my box, right? Going back to the box model for a second. This is the box model. Notice how I have different properties: padding top, padding right, padding bottom, padding left. I can specify those, or I could use a shorthand like this. That's top, right, bottom, left. Notice how I don't put percentages for the zeros, right? Zeros are just zeros in my layout. It'd be the same, right? Let's take a look and see if I was to go back here and see that. Refresh. No difference, right? So no difference in that. So that's one way to write it. The other way to write my shorthand is to do this. Top, bottom, right, left. You can do that too. And it would look like this. Top, bottom, right, left. So 2 numbers. So they group them together again. This is another shorthand that they have for properties, right? So really I've shown you 3 ways of doing it. The long way, padding top, padding right, padding bottom, padding left, right? Or you could do it the first shorthand, which is every one in its own, separated by spaces, right? The next one is this one, and the third one, or the fourth one would be one number representing the same amount all the way around. Questions around that? Because you're going to see a lot of designs out there. When you go up online, if you were to compare somebody else's CSS, you'll see it that it's written different ways, with one number, with two numbers, with three numbers. You know, three numbers also is one. But let's take a look at this one. So this is top, bottom, right, left. So that means I don't want any more padding for the top or bottom, but I want for right and left. Let's take a look at that. So if I refresh, no difference. Okay. Now, how about mixing? Can I mix percentages and pixels? Because remember I told you that up and down is okay because I can scroll. I have lots of room to scroll up and down. Right? So pixels aren't so bad from an absolute perspective, up and down. I may need to use that sometimes, right? Or M's, that's another way you can do it. And M's are based on a basic 16 pixel layout, right? So if I can use, instead of percentage, let's see if I can mix it up. So top and bottom, right? I want like 4 or 5 pixels. So let's say 5 pixels. So now I'm using 2 different units, 5 pixels for top and bottom, 0.5% for left and right. And the reason why is that way it's flexible left and right, but the top and bottom are fixed because it's okay to scroll. Let's take a look at that. So I'm going to go back to my layout and refresh. And man, there's nothing there. How come? Okay, so we can inspect what's going on here because I want to see how this is laying out. So if something doesn't work, right, I can always go right up here, click onto it, and say inspect element to see what's going on. Right? That's another thing that I want you guys to get in the habit of doing. And if I look at the styles, right, I have text decoration none, so I'm targeting the A tag. Let's look at the list item. My display is inline. Notice how I have a padding top of 5 pixels, padding bottom of 5 pixels. There's nothing. It doesn't show anything here, right? As an example. And my margin to the right, padding to the right is 5, right? And padding to the left is 5. It's showing you that. Right? Notice how it's graying them out too. There's been a lot of stuff that's been reset for my padding and so on. My display is, even though, as it went from list item, it went into display none because I've overwritten it. My list style has also been reset. All this stuff is happening here, and this is a great way of kind of figuring out what's going on. Right? So I've applied my 5 pixel top and bottom, right, to this thing. But my padding, it's not showing me the real picture. Why is that? Well, one thing is we don't know how each of these things is laying out. It's just showing blue right now. Let's add some test borders to see what's going on, right? Because I want to see how I can troubleshoot my layout a little bit, right? So going back, again, I'm going to add a test border here. So to my UL. So let's go class is equal to test border. And you know what? Let's make, instead of solid, just to make it easier for us to see it, let's make it dotted. Because I want to have a dotted layout for my test border. And inside my class, let's just target one list item, not all of them. So we'll have a class of test border in here as well. So we can test one list item out and see what the effect is of what we're doing. And we'll even do our nav. So here's our test border for our nav. So you have borders around everything to kind of allocate or kind of isolate the problem. Right? So we have a problem right now. Let's take a look and see what it is. Back and refresh. And notice how the link itself has what I asked. Right? See how the link itself has 5 pixels on the top and the bottom, but it's hovering outside of my nav bar. Why is that? Because it's overflowing. Remember we talked about an overflow property last week, right? In the default layout that I have, right? If I have a container, a UL container, and inside there I have a bunch of list items, the list items can overflow outside of my container unless I otherwise specify. And the way to stop that from happening is to use overflow auto, right? That's a property of my UL, right? So if I go back, And if I go here to my overflow property, if I say something like this, overflow auto, and notice what it says, so the behavior of the auto value is a UA dependent, but should, it says, should allow me to do what I have to do. Let's see what it does. I put it in there, and if I go back now and refresh for overflow auto, right, notice how it's still hugging everything. Now I've added some borders in there, so it's kind of hard to tell because the links are overlapping. But let's make a more dramatic effect. So here in the browser, remember you can modify the elements in the browser from a testing perspective. Let's add 10 pixels, right, of of top and bottom, right? How about 15 pixels top and bottom? And you notice there's no difference. I can add 15, I can add 100 pixels top and bottom. It's not working because of my overflow property. Okay. Well, we've got a couple of things going on, right, with our overflow, but we don't have really any kind of height for our UL element, right? Our UL and even our nav bar, as an example, it's shrink wrapping, right? So how do I add height? Well, I could specify a height. Please don't try percent. Let's say I say my height for my my unordered list itself, the actual element for the unordered list. Let's say I make it something like 30 pixels. So a fixed height. Now let's see what that does. So if I go back, if I refresh, I get fixed height. But there's a problem, right? Take a look how I can see that I've got a border that's 10 or 15 pixels or 5 pixels right now around it. But my elements seem to hover on the top, right? Because that's my vertical alignment, right? I have my text alignment, and I want to make these links hover in the middle, right? I have my horizontal alignment, which I could put in, but I have my vertical alignments with which what I want to do, and I want to set up my links to vertical align center. Let's try this out. So I go back to my UL, and I say vertical align. And if you notice, if I type in some values, and if I start typing center, if that's an actual value, it'll come up. Let's see if that's possible. And I refresh. No effect, right? Again, let's see if what's happened here with if my target, my UL, if I see it now, see how it's crossed out, and it says that invalid property value for vertical align. If I try and add something that doesn't make any sense, like I want to have my links in the middle, it'll say that. It'll say that, well, that doesn't work, right? And that's where the browser really helps us troubleshoot, where I want to kind of align it to that level. But if I really want this to happen, if I want to have a 30 pixel height, as an example, and I want to have my links floating in the middle, what else could I do? Anybody have an idea? Yes. Okay, I like your ideas. So instead of center, I put middle. That makes sense. See how it didn't give me code hinting before? Now it has. And if I go back and refresh, right? Middle works, but no effect. How come? I'm aligning my UL middle, right? So I'm saying anything that's inside of my UL is aligned middle, right? Should I be doing it on the list item? Let's see. So if I go back to, and if you're ever confused about that, I mean, it's as simple as doing one of these. So I'm going to put this line middle and see if that works, right? What does vertical line do anyway? We'll talk about that. Back, refresh. A little bit better, right? It looks like it's kind of in the middle of its own element, right? There's the middle of its own element right there, but my vertical alignment is gone. Let's talk about a couple other things. If I unclick overflow, right? So unclick overflow. Any effect? No. Text line right takes my text to the back. I can click it and test it to see what it looks like here in the browser. If I take my height away, that's bad because, and my overflow just takes away that ability. It doesn't actually help me in any way, right? So overflow auto is not really helping me, right? So I can take that away. But my height, I definitely want my height to be a minimum of 30 pixels. That's really cool, right? Let's go back. So I've got my height on my UL, right? What about if it's my height was on my nav bar instead? So I kind of target my nav. So anything that's got a nav element, this is kind of interesting, nav element by itself. If I just do this, is this enough to put a height of 30 pixels? Some of this stuff is confusing for some of you. I'll leave it out like this and see what it does. What do we do? Okay, there's a problem. So it kind of gave us the height, but notice how my UL, now that I've taken my overflow value away, has kind of, this thing is overflowing and it's outside, and this hugs the top, right? Again, if I want to hover, if I want to test a style here, I can always do something like vertical align. Vertical align. And if I say, and if you notice, there's middle, bottom, baseline, super, text top, text bottom, and so on. And if I go middle, right, there's no effect to my vertical alignment whatsoever. Okay. How do I do that? I could add padding to the top, more padding if I want to. So that's another fix. That's temporary. But if I was to do that, go back here, I would have to add it differently than this because my padding here is both the same on top and bottom, right? And I can also add margin to the top of my list items, right? So let's do that. Let's split it off into padding top. So if I want to specify padding top as 10 pixels, right, to push it down, and padding left and right, right? Padding left and right to be 5%. I want to be able to do that. And padding bottom to be 5 pixels. Then I also actually have a formula for doing it in one line, right? Because now I'm specifying all the values. So padding top, 10 pixels. Padding right and left, 0.5 pixels, 0.5%. Bottom, 5 pixels, 0.5. That's kind of top, bottom, and this doesn't matter, right? Vertical line. If I try this out, you see what it gives me. It gives me this, right? Again, if I was to look at it from an alignment perspective, if I look at my list items, I have all those items that are here. You can see how it breaks down: 10 pixels to the top, 5 pixels to the bottom, right? As an example. Now, the reason why it doesn't look like 10 pixels to the top is because, right, you see how the border is hugging this thing right through. Okay, what about if I have a nav element and I've tried to target my nav element as well? Let's go back to that little thing here. My nav is 30 pixels. What if I make my nav 50 pixels? Right? Just to give myself more room, more breathing room, so to speak, right? What does it do? So refresh. There's my nav, but still my links kind of hug the top. Right? What am I missing here? I'm expecting something to happen, but I'm targeting the wrong stuff. I've been adding padding this whole time, right? But it's not padding that I need. What do I need? Margin, right? Margin can be applied between elements, right? So if I go the margin between my, my UL as an example, margin between my UL and my list items are whatever the size are. And the other option is if I put in the height of my list items. Not necessarily the height of my because I know that they're overflowing anyway. So my height of my list items, I can put that in there as well. So let's see what happens there if I do that instead. So an example of that would be if I go back, and if my height for my nav bar is 50 pixels, right? And then I assign a height. Can I assign a height for my list items? So height. I want them to be fixed as well, 50 pixels. And notice how it highlights this area. It says properties ignored due to the display, which is display inline, right? So why? Because I've got to set display inline. But if I put display inline block, we kind of ran into this last time, then that height will work. Now let's see what I get when I take it from inline to inline block and refresh. Okay, cool. So I've got this 50 pixels. There it is, right? That's how big my what my list items look like. They're the same height now as my nav bar, which swims outside of my header, right? That's what's happening right now. Okay, that's interesting. Well, that means maybe my header itself and my nav element, because if I go back to my style, my nav element is 50 pixels, my LI height is 50 pixels. And I don't have a header element of anything. I don't have any kind of class to my header. Right now it's 12 columns, and it's just a test border. But I could certainly target that by all my, I only have one header on my page. I can say something like this, header. I want to make this overflow auto, see what that does. Because we have this overflow property we're trying to use here, right? So let's go back. And I want to go back to my design and refresh. And now I have this. That's kind of what I want. And I want now this list item to be floating in the middle, my text to be floating in the middle of my list item, right? And remember, I have uneven padding, so I got to be very careful here how I do that. So let's go back. Going back to my list item, I'm going to go back to the styles I had before with 5 and 5. If I just do that and hover in the middle, or even if I put it, if I say something like this, vertical line, middle, right? Does that help me? Right? Let's go back and see what it does. Any help? Because of the way we're doing it, right? I need to add more, from what it looks like to me, more padding on the top, right? So instead of 10, we'll add 15. Let's try that out. And again, you might think this is crazy, but you'll see what I'm talking about in a bit. 15 pixels as we design our nav bar, so it looks like the way we want it to look. Refresh. That looks a lot better, right? Take a look. Now you see our list items, where our list items are, and we have our link 1, link 2, link 3, and so on. These are list items here. Okay, I want the back of the entire nav bar, I want to make it black, right? So what do I target? I can target my header, I can target my nav bar, I can target my UL. They all kind of shrink wrap my my navigation elements. So which one would I target? What would you target? Header, your nav element, or your UL? Which one? Come on, I want to hear from the girls in the corner there. So Kayla or Marissa, which one? So I want to make the back of my nav bar black, right? Which element should I target? The nav element, the header element, or the UL? The nav itself, the nav element. Okay, well, let's check this out. So if I was to do that, so here's my nav element, and I want to make this black. So of course I'm going to say background dash color is equal to black. Now I got to be careful, because if I say my background color is black, then I can't see my anchor tags, my links, because right now they're blue. It would kind of show up really weird. Let's make them white. So we'll say color white. Notice how I'm using background color for my background, and for foreground color, which is my text, I'm using color property. All right. And let's see how that looks. There's my links, right? I'm not getting any feedback from my links now. I want, when I hover over the links, right, I get a feedback. I get some kind of dark gray. And I'm just reviewing. This is all refreshing what we did last week, because some of you saw it one time and you're like, you won't see it again, and you won't know how to do it, right? So I want to kind of hover over here. When I hover over, I want to get some kind of feedback. I have to use something called the pseudo class, right? It's really an event that I'm trying to do with CSS without any JavaScript. Back in the day, this was all done with JavaScript, by the way. I couldn't do it with CSS at all, right? I couldn't hover over an element and make the whole thing light up, right? So let me show you how that works again. So going back here, if I hover over the list item, right, that's what I want to say, then it lights up. So because it's a pseudo class and I'm applying it to the list item, I put it in order. So I say nav list item, and I use the pseudo class, colon, and then hover when I hover over the suit, over a list item that's inside the nav container that has the nav class, then I want to change my background color. Right, that's what I want to change. My background color to like a gray, slightly brighter than the darkness, right? And if I was to go back and check this out and refresh, and I go back and hover over it, then I get this kind of moving link, so I can see that I get some feedback now from my nav bar, right? Okay, but I also want to know what's the active element. Remember, we talked about this as well. And I want to make an active class. I'm going to go back to my code, and because this is all around navigation, right? So I want to say something like my headers first, and then I want to kind of note my active element, right? My active list item. I could put in something like the list item that's hovered over, or whatever, and more complicated. Or I could just apply class. So I'm going to say active means that my background color, background-color. Maybe it's going to be like some kind of dark red, which is going to be a lighter color. I'm just using stock values. You can use whatever color you like. And the only way that works is if let me take my test border away from my list item, and let's put in active. We'll do the same thing for this while we're at it. We'll take it away from our UL. And we'll take it away from my nav because we're pretty close to where we want it right now. So I'm going to take these test borders away because they're going to kind of affect my layout. Okay, cool. So I've kind of done that. Let's see what it looks like. Refresh. Hey, what happened? What? Hold on. How did I break my layout? Well, I did one of these. Right? That was interesting. I got these hrefs with spaces in here. And everything is complaining. It's saying, I don't understand where you're trying to take me, Tom, but I'm going to ignore that for a second. And let's rename these links for a second. Let's just fix this. So again, this is going to be my home. I've been trying to prepare you for your final project all this time, right? Products, services, about us, and contact us, right? Those are the main ones. Okay, cool. So there you go. There you have it. Now let's see what that looks like when I fix it up. Right? I don't like the font. The font sucks. And I want to make it so that, you know what, my font on my whole page is going to be at least, I want it Helvetica Neue, just like the Apple used to use. How do I change that? Come on, guys. This is like, it's like CSS 101. How about the guys in this table over here? How do I change the font, my font family, I give it to you, for the whole page? What element do I target? Body? Body. So go right to the top because that's the first one. I kind of start at the top and I work my way back down. So let's say my body element then, my font family, right, is Helvetica, right? If I want to specify a type, like Neue, if I don't know how to spell it, I can also specify, kind of secondary types. Like it's going to be Helvetica, Arial Helvetica Sans Serif, right? So if I don't know what Helvetica Neue is, right, which is a little different, I can specify the other one. If they don't have that font in the system, I'm okay with Arial Helvetica Sans Serif. Also, I want to specify my font size, but my font size should be 100% font size. Right? If I make it 100%, is that okay? I'm getting this really weird error because I haven't put my semicolon. Font size 100%. Line height, I might want to go, you know, slightly larger than normal. So I say line height. I usually like to go at least 1.2 or 1.1 M's. Let's do 1.1 M's, so slightly larger than normal, right? And let's take a look what that looks like. All right, gives us a little bit more, a different look and feel, okay? Again, with that navigation schema that we've got going on right now. Okay, from a response perspective, how does it look? Right, well, we're pretty good still, right? But there's a bit of problem here. Notice how we're really getting tight in here right now. Like we're kind of getting really tight. And we're going to talk about how to do that responsive design stuff in a bit. I've talked about lists to great effect, but how about I want to do I've got a one column, you know, kind of, this is 100% this thing right now. I haven't specified anything for my container, right? So let me go back. And I'm going to go back to my class here. I've kind of hammered away at my nav bar. Here's my main nav, and I can put that in there. I can say this is my header, with some comments, right? Header, and this is my main nav. I can put that in there too. So I can say something like main nav, and then down here I have my container with my test border on. But you know, my container is really should be around my main. I want my test border to be around everything, right? So I want my main element to kind of surround this stuff that I've got going on here, right? So I'm going to kind of take my main, cut it, and you know, put it down here. And then I can right-click in Visual Studio Code and say Format Code to format me a little bit better. That's what I've done there. Let's just kind of move this over to the left a little bit. Okay, so I've got my main element, and underneath my main, right, that's outside of my container, I also have my footer, which I don't have yet. So here's my footer, and it has an H4 tag inside of it, and my H4 tag has some kind of copyright, so and copy, which is copyright 2015, right? Of course, that didn't go through, but that's okay. So how come that didn't work, guys? And copy. That should have worked, right? I go ampersand, copy, like that. Is that not the sign that I use for my copyright statement? Let's take a look. Doesn't give me any code hinting like that. Here's my copyright statement, right? I want to give my footer some margins, all right, or some padding, right? Because this is just way over here. So I can target my footer. So I'm going to go back to my page. I'm going to go, and I'm going to do it at the bottom. Again, I'm trying to do it in order right here, right? So I'm going to kind of put in some comments that are, this is my footer styles. And I want to target my footer. I can just call it like, you know, target my footer item itself. So I can say something like footer. And I want to have, for all my footers, I want to give them some kind of padding. And again, I can also do something like this, where I said a padding of 1% or something like that. I could do that. Now my container has a margin of 2% and a padding of 2%. That might be okay, but not the margin. I want the margin to be 0, right? So I'll say my padding is 2%. There we go. I go back, refresh, and my padding is 2%. So it's in line with what I'm seeing right here, right? Which is kind of not so bad. Okay, cool. So I've got my kind of like my footer, and I've got this piece here. But you know what? I want this piece, right? The one that's surrounding everything right now. And by the way, my hello world and this paragraph tag are in something called a main, you know, main tag right now, right? This one right here is actually my div tag that wraps everything else up, right? My container tag, right? I want my container, right, to be 100% of the viewport height, right? So how do I do that? How do I add a height to my container so it takes up the entire size of my viewport? Anybody remember how to do that? Oh, guys, you guys are all sleepy-eyed this morning, right? Or you just forgot everything I told you last week, or you didn't watch the videos, or all of the above. Okay, I got to push you. All right, here we go. Maybe you don't care, but the way what I want to do is I want to target my container, and my margin, my padding is 2%, but what I want to make, because I put in this height is equal to device height, I can do something like this. I can say my height then from my container is 100 VH. 100 VH, which is 100% of viewport height. And if I do that, and if I go back, and if I refresh, you can see that my container now is massive, right? And actually pushes my copyright right down. So maybe 100% wouldn't be right. And when I say 100%, means if I scrunch up or if I resize my screen, right, it's also going to resize. Right? So if I'm going to do one of these and refresh, it's going to resize my container so it pushes everything down here. So my copyright actually gets pushed down by doing that. Again, before CSS3, not possible. You have to use JavaScript for that. Okay, how do I do this if I go back? So that's too much, 100%. Let's make it 80% and see if that's a little better. Right? 80% of viewport height, I want to have a little bit on the bottom. So if I put 100%, it takes up my whole top, my whole bottom. And that might be too much too. Let's see how that looks. So refresh. Still too much, right? 60%. I'm going down in 20s, right? Refresh, a bit better. So 60% of viewport height, this thing takes over. Notice how, in this particular case, that's not a good thing. So how it grows and shrinks. I got more viewport height here than I do here for some reason. Points it down, and I can actually kind of scrunches it up, right? And that's okay. So that's one. The other thing is sometimes I want my my object to be fixed. I don't want it to move with my scroll, and there's ways of doing that as well with some special effects. We'll talk about it in a second. All right, I want to make this column this hello world, which is up here. Let's put some test borders around it, right? So in my main, I want to have a class of just test border, right? Test border. So you can see our main, which is different than my actual div tag. My div tag is a wrapper that goes around everything, okay? My main content, if you will, right? So if I do that and if I refresh, right, you can see that this is my main. So this is not good, right? Because I have no board, I have no margin here whatsoever. Or I've got margin that comes from here. This is my padding that comes from my container, but I've got no padding in here. So I want to kind of add a padding in here, and probably something like a 1% or 2% padding inside of this is going to be okay. So let's do that. I'm going to go back in here, and I say my main. I'm targeting my main, right? So again, if I go in order, my container, and then I have all these layouts for my widths and my thing. So definitely it's going to be underneath my nav. So I'm going to kind of move my container underneath there too. So I'm going to cut that out. And here's my nav. And before my footer, I'm going to put my container in there. And underneath my container, I'm going to put my main, targeting my main tag, my main element. I'm going to say that, well, you know what, my padding in here is going to be 2% as well. I'm duplicating, right? 2%, 2%, 2%. If I refresh, I got that. Right? So a bit of padding all around. Okay, I want to create a 2-column layout, right? A 2-column layout. And what I want to do, if I can, is I want to take my main. I only want to give it 4 columns, right, or 5 columns, and I want to give an aside 3 columns or 4 columns, right? How do I do that? Well, I've already set up my columns, right? So let's see if I can do this, and it'll be okay, right? Well, it will be and it won't be. We'll see how it works out first. So I go back, and if I want to specify that this main object here has a class of, again, I want to have it so it's a columns 6. I want to have 6 columns here. That's specifying a width. So if I see what that does, if I go back to my layout and I refresh, now my columns goes down to 6. Right? So remember, I specified column 6 is 50%. So I can remember how many columns I'm using. I'm using half of all my available columns. Now I want to have a column of space, right? a column of space, right? Plus, I also want to have a an aside, right? So a column of space is about 8%, which is probably around this. This is like 2 and 2, 4, 6, about this much, right? So I'm gonna have a column of space, and then I'm gonna have my aside next to it. So let's see if I can do that. So go back here, and I don't have an aside. Let's make one. So inside my container tag, which is my div tag, right? I want to specify an aside. So I'm gonna say aside, and I probably should have done that like this. With inside my aside, I'm going to have an H2 element, or an H3 element, sorry, which is going to say, here's my aside. Here is my aside, right? I haven't specified different styles for H elements yet, but I will, right? And this is, of course, going to be inside my H3 element, which means it's going to look like this. It's not going to be a child of my element. Inside, next to my element itself, is going to be a paragraph tag with lorem text of 50 again. My side. And you can see that didn't work out what I wanted. So let me undo that. So here's my H3 element, and instead of my greater than sign, which means contains, it means I want to make this a plus, which means a sibling of. Plus is a sibling of, and by the way, these things I'm using is the same stuff we use in CSS. We want to target a sibling of a specific element. Okay, so tab, so now you can see that they're separate. And when I go back to my layout to see what it looks like, so I haven't specified anything for my aside here, right? If I refresh, I have it down here. Okay, I have it down here. So I've got a style that I want to apply to my aside, and it's going to look similar to this, right? This main style, right? So I want to kind of specify a style. Maybe I want to call it content or something, where I have my content, every content style has about 1.5, because I think 2% is too much, about 1.5% padding all the way around it, right? So go back. So instead of my main having a padding of 2%, that's not really a good idea, right? It's better for me to have something called content, a class of content with that has a padding, right, of 1.5% all the way around, right? And if I do that, and if I go back to even to the footer, right, I can get rid of the footer tag altogether because I don't have any footer styles yet. And I can apply a class of content to these areas, right? So my main would have a class of content, got some content in there, and so does my aside, so a class of content. This is why classes are really powerful, because you can use the same style over and over again, right? And the same thing with my footer, which is also some content. There you go. And if I refresh, now my layout's a little bit different. If I want to put a test border around my aside so we know how much it is, let's do that as well. Just so we can start laying out my, there's test border. Take a break in a few minutes, okay guys? For the last hour. So this is my test border, and if I refresh, it looks like this. Now remember what I said, I only want, if I have 50% of my columns allocated to my main content, which is right here, I only want something like, so this is 6 columns. I only want something like maybe a column on one side, so it's 1 column, so it's 7. A column on the other side, that's 8. Means I only have 4 columns in the middle, plus some kind of separation in between, right? So I got 3 columns left. It means I can probably make this 5 and 3 if I wanted to make it right, or 5 and 4. Let's try that out. So let's make this go back down to 5, and let's put my aside as a column of 4, and let's see how that looks. Refresh. All right, so that looks like this piece will fit over here, right? But how come it's not going over here? Anybody? Yeah. I have to align it to the right, but I I have to use another property, and typically what I want to do is, actually I want to align left. That's what I want to do, right? And what I mean is that I will align to the top left corner of my page, top left corner of my container. My container is my div tag, which is the wrapper. And if I apply align left, right, to this object right here, which is my main, then everything else will align left into it. Let's try this out. So if I go back here, and if I say, well, you know what, I want to align left. And so the way to do that, of course, is to do something like this, which I recommend. Make it left container. And what I'm going to say is float left. Now, we haven't talked about floats too much. I want to talk about it today. Float left. When I go back, I want to apply this to my, first, let's apply it to my main class, right? So I'm going to say column 5 left. Okay? And if I refresh my page, I get this. Kind of scrunches that up even more, right? All right, cool. Let's apply left. Look how, by the way, look at what's happening here. Look at my border, what's going on. My hello, here's my aside, is cutting into the border that's my hello world. I just wanted to show you so you understand what it does, okay? All right, let's do that for my aside. Let's see if there's a difference. So if I go back and I add into my aside, I add left. And if I refresh that, so go back to here and refresh. Well, there's your 2 columns, right? So I've got my hello world and I've got my, here's my aside aligning left, right? What if I take it away from this one? So I'll go back. And I don't want to put left on this one. I only want to put left on this one. So I'm going to kind of specify there's no, I'm not aligning left, I'm not floating left. And if I do that, I save and I go back, I refresh, it goes right back down here. It's almost like I got to have float left on both items, right? Another thing I want to do, I want to make sure that my footer, right, is, I want to have a clear, I want to clear the floats on my footer, right? Because sometimes what happens is when you align left, you align to the leftmost, in your parent container, that's what align left or float left means. You're floating your boxes to the left of your uppermost, of your outside container, right? So if my container is my div tag, right, which is right here, this container tag right here. That's my main container. That's that red border that goes all the way around, right? Then I have borders around my main content and my aside, right? And I want to float one next to the other one, right? That's what's happening. Okay, so this is kind of cool, but I want to be able to, if I have another one I don't want to float, that I want to kind of have something that's happening beside me, I could do that, right? Here's another possibility. If I say, if I, instead of floating left like I'm doing here, what if I say that if I want to stack them next to each other, and they're just containers, right? I did this for my, I did it for my my other stuff, my navigation. Could I not just say that these 2 items are inline block, right? Like, so everything, all my containers are they're inline block, right? So there's still block elements. There's block elements stacked one on top of the other, like this. They're block. Inline block would do this, right? Put them next to each other, right? So could I do that instead of floating? So let's say if I said instead of float left, let's just comment this one out. Try this. I say display is inline block, right? So let's try that instead. So an inline block display for these 2 elements. I've applied the left on both of these 2 things, right? And probably left is the wrong word. If it works, maybe I want to call this inline, right? Or inline block. Let's check this out. What the effect will be. Oops, that's not what I wanted to touch. So if refresh, and that kind of works too. But here's a problem. Look at my aside. It's like way over here, right? And my hello world is way down here. How come? Because inline block, what it does is it tries to, the bottom is the baseline that it kind of hugs it. So that works. That can also work. But the problem that I have is that they're floating next. They're kind of, this one's kind of pushed down to align with the top of this one. So they're aligning to the bottom, the baseline, right? So that's another possibility. I wanted to show you these two possibilities, right? The other way is to say inline. There's inline block and there's inline. Let's look at the difference. Instead of inline block, I put inline and then refresh. And now I get this, right? Which is kind of messed, right? Kind of looks weird actually, right? So inline doesn't do it. That's like, it won't do what I want it to do. Block, if I go just block like this, which is the default, they will just go one on top of the other like this. That's block. Block is stacking one on top of the other, right, from a display perspective. So float left, what it does is it moves both of the items that this style has been assigned to the left corner, of the parent container. Because both of these items, main and aside, are children of the div tag, container tag, right? They're both going to try to move to the left of that container tag. Okay, what's the effect of that in a responsive layout though? Because we've talked about responsive design. If I scrunch this layout down like this, and there's no more room for them to kind of float left. And look what happens over here with my copyright. It's kind of hugging here, right? They're going to try their best to stay to the left of each other, right? I don't have any separation in the middle yet, right? But I could. And I could put an aside, in my aside, I could put a margin, right? A margin between these two containers here, right? Of about, like I said, one column, right? Okay, and this is a problem. I don't want this ever to happen, right? I want my copyright never to hug to the left. And it happens because as my objects push outside of my container tag, right? Because my container tag doesn't contain them. I don't have an overflow value for it. It's allowed, just like up here was allowed, it's allowed to push outside of my container tag, my content. To fix this, going back to this, in my container, I could put an overflow value. So there's different values here. Scroll, hidden, visible, auto. Let's put auto. And if I go back in there and try it again, so here's my overflow auto. And if I kind of do one of these again, if I kind of resize my page, and I resize to the point where it's down, look what happens. The content gets hidden now. And it kind of gets pushed down to the point where, because my VH, my height is minimum VH of 60, and I've set it to only 60, right? That means everything inside of there is hidden, which means that value, height, instead of min height, is what I should be using. Let's try this out. So go back to my container where I have my height of 60 VH, which is my viewport height. I can say that, well, the minimum height is that, but I want you to, if I need to, expand, push everything out, shrink wrap everything, and push everything down until you have enough room. Let's see how this works. So if I go this, and as I start pushing down with my overflow value and my min height, it'll push my copyright statement all the way to the bottom and keep my alignment. This is still 5 columns and 4 columns, but my columns have been reduced because of my responsive layout. Okay? That's what's happening here. Okay, I need a space in between here. There's a couple of ways to do this. How do I do that? I want an offset. I want an offset of about 1 column, right? And usually it's 1 or 2 columns, right? So let's decide it. We'll call it an offset of 1, where I can also do something like this. I want to push everything to the right. I want to push everything to the right by 1 column. So push 1. Let's make a layout like that. So here's my container and my content. And before or around the left, I want to create another class that's push 1, right? Dash 1. So I'm pushing to the right 1, and I want to say that I want to add margin, right, of about 8.33%. Let's push 1, right? Now notice how the patterns are here again, right? margin, not padding, right? And it's not width, right? Let's do a couple of them. Let's do push 2. Sometimes I wanted to push a couple columns, right? So push 2 would be, I'm not doing more, right? Is 16.66%. So I got push 1 and push 2, so I can push to the right. How does that work? I can apply that to this. So I can say, well, you know what? I want to have, it's going to float to the left, but I want to push to the right by about 1 column. Push a column to the right, move it over 1 column, right? And to give me some space between my test border, or sorry, my main, which is right here, and my side. Let's see if that works. Refresh. Whoa, man, what happened there? How come it did that? I pushed it over margin-wise. It pushed over 1 column, but it also went down, right? How come it did that? Well, let's take a short break, and when we come back, I'll explain why.